Come, come, ye saints, no toil nor labor fear, but with joy wend your way. Though hard to you this journey may appear, grace shall be as your day.
Well, this has been wonderful so far. We've talked about your early years in the church. We've talked about becoming a CES employee, co-employees. We've talked about how beautiful it was for you as a couple and as a family. Now we're going to just spend at least an hour on why would anyone ever in your positions leave the church. And so, since John, I think maybe maybe both of you have things that stretch back into your childhood. And so let's just start there. What seeds of doubt or concerns sprouted, and talk us through the process of you getting to the point where you would ever want to resign from the church.
Sure.
Let alone not believe.
Yeah, sure. The earliest, I think, doubt that I can really say I'm having issues was as a missionary in my first area, and it was specifically about Joseph Smith. And I wrote that off at the time as unpleasant encounters with people of other faiths as I tried to talk about him, and evil. I would have, it was the devil, but...
What was the issue about Joseph?
It was just whether or not his story was true. At the time...
Why would you doubt that?
I don't know, except that maybe I was thinking and I was having some... I'm sorry, that was a little rude, but
really?
No, I'm very analytical, and so I feel like I had to suspend in retrospect, but you're asking the journey and not retrospect. So I'm 19, and I'm seriously doubting that Joseph told the truth, to the point of where I finally opened up to my mission companion, and he said, "It's okay, I have doubts too," and he comforted me, and I got a blessing from my mission president. He said, "I'm having doubts about this," and then I had an awesome mission, and I think I did really well as a missionary, and we've already talked about that, so I'll skip ahead to things that would happen in CES. I actually pulled some notes out. I was going through them the other day, and I can give you a date here because I've got the notes when Wilford Griggs, who was at the time a teacher at BYU and a former CES man, and he came and spoke to us about the Book of Abraham on October 7th, 1999. And I have 5 pages of copious notes. And at the time, it was very important to me to hear somebody who was an expert talk about the Book of Abraham so that I could continue to, because I was hearing these things that people who really look at it closely hear, that the papyrus had been found, and that Egyptologists translated it, and it was nothing like what Joseph said. And so as a teacher, wanting to believe and feeling responsibility to teach other people about this book, this was manna to me. I mean, I sat there, and it was probably 3 or 4 hours, and I was able to kind of put that concern, and let me just voice it. I started to doubt if the Book of Abraham was what it purports to be. But I was able to put it on the shelf through experiences like this.
I took a class from Griggs, and I think he lectured straight from the Hebrew, or straight from the original language of the New Testament. Greek.
It was
from the Greek, right?
Yep,
He's
got it right here in my
guy,
notes.
Right?
He is very bright, and it was enough for me. And I'm going to say this because it's part of my journey, but smart people in the church do not make the church any more true than intelligent people outside of the church make it false.
Right.
And I knew that, but like many members, it was important for me. It was my career, and it was also what I truly felt in my heart to have these kinds of encounters with apologists and my own personal studies that could help me say, I may not fully understand it, but I have faith, and my faith will bridge the gap, and I'll put it on a shelf. A few years later, polygamy comes up, and in a area meeting, and I overhear somebody, and it's not that I don't think about these things at all, but I have to say that part of my journey is the curriculum that I was teaching, because I was adamant about teaching from the manuals and the scriptures and the words of the prophets. I didn't deviate. When I prepared a lesson, in fact, I even I guess at times use it as a crutch. If I was short on time and I needed to really get something done quickly, I had this awesome curriculum. I had lesson suggestions outlined for me, and it was beautiful, and I really relied on that. So it's not that I never thought about these things, but I heard one of the brethren in my area at an area meeting he was talking about Todd Compton's book, In Sacred Loneliness, and I'd not heard of this. And I wasn't even indirectly in the conversation, but he said, this is what I remember hearing, I wouldn't recommend it for any of my students. And I wouldn't even read it yourself unless you feel like you're very comfortable with your faith. And I remember saying, I have faith. I can handle this. This is what I do for a living, you know. I am in. And I'd never bought the book. I started Googling and searching and just reading reviews, and then it led me to Wives of Joseph Smith, a website. And then I started reading, and there were times where I would go to what at the time I considered anti-Mormon, because as a teacher, I needed to be aware of what the critics were saying. I needed to be able to refute that, and if my students brought up questions or they brought me a pamphlet and said, my friend gave me this, he's a member of the Assembly of God or whatever, how do you respond to this? So I was aware of it, but that is when I first began to discover polygamy, and that is part of my concern.
And so what were the things about polygamy that bothered you?
Well, the number of wives that Joseph had, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say this because there are going to be, I shouldn't be, but there are going to be people that say, you were a teacher and you didn't know this. But John, I think that's part of the story. And that is that I was a teacher and that I was hired and that I was by the book, the best of my ability, teaching what I was told to teach. And I had to discover these things.
Although you knew about polygamy, you just didn't know all the details.
I didn't know the number of wives. Okay. I didn't specifically know...
what did you think?
When I read Helen Mar Kimball's story, it so disturbed me that I had to put it away. Like I had to say, I'm not going to get that book. And then again, I put it on me.
Okay, wait. What did you think about Joseph's polygamy before you started investigating?
God asked him to do it.
Okay.
It was acceptable in the eyes of the Lord as it is in the Old Testament. Righteous men have done this. And I can't fully understand it because the keys to practice this thing are not on the earth, and I wasn't there. And so...
And how many wives did you think he had?
Emma.
You didn't know that he was a polygamist?
You knew he...
Well, I knew that he was a polygamist, but what I'm saying is the reflection of my growing up. Now, when I was a missionary and I started learning these things, I knew that Joseph was a polygamist, but I had to come to the realization that I never really allowed that thought to sink in.
Right. You know it kind of somewhere in here, but it's not here, right?
I suddenly realized
weren't you taught as well that polygamy was what he did to take care of the widows and, you know?
I think I had put maybe a mental block or some psychological working in my own head that allowed me to say, this is not a man who is married to another woman who's having intercourse with dozens of other women. This is just a faith test. This is a structural thing. This is a providing thing. This is a godly thing. And then when I would get distraught, even in the least bit, it was easy for me to say, you just don't get it. You're not spiritual enough. You don't have enough faith. If you had enough faith, you would understand. But the polyandry, I didn't get into it a whole lot then, because this is the way I would describe it. It was imperative for me to put that on a shelf because it was disturbing enough that I wouldn't have been able to do what I've been asked to do as a teacher in CES. So I didn't buy Todd's book. I did not at that time look into it much further, and I kind of put it out. And what happens for me is I'm so in the church and in the thrust of it. I mean, I'm serving on the High Council. I'm in CES. I'm all of these things, that it's not very hard, at least for me at this time, to just say, I'll ask that question during the millennium. You know, when I talk to Brother Joseph, I'll ask him.
That's got to be what the general authorities do, right? They're so busy.
Right.
It's got to be.
I was very busy in the church, and I think most people are, but this was an extraordinarily busy time in my life. The Adam God theory.
Okay, wait, no, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, please, ask anything you want.
So polygamy, tell me the disturbing things.
The age of some of the wives.
Okay, what ages?
Helen Mar Kimball was 14. And again, I know that because I've read a lot, and most people who listening to this podcast have, and there are some discrepancies about who said what and who can we trust. And that was one of the things I went back on over and over, saying, look, history it's not a science.
Right.
And so anyway.
How many teenagers, approximately?
I couldn't say. I think that there were maybe 4 or 5 that I could think of, but I don't have the list memorized.
Yeah. So lots of teenagers, lots of girls 14, 15, 16 years old.
But those, the age, believe it or not, I can't believe I'm saying this, but at the time, that wasn't as disturbing to me as the polyandry was.
What is that?
The idea that a woman who is already married to a man, and in some instances happily married to active members of the church, for any reason whatsoever why Joseph would have to have between 8 and 11, those are the numbers that come to mind, wives, women that were already married to other men. And in some instances, call people or send them on missions and then make the approach to marry this woman while her husband was gone. That was extremely disturbing to me. And when I started reading Rough Stone Rolling, it rattled me. And when I shared this with my father, he said, that book strengthened my testimony. So I'm open to that. Some people will read that and say it's a strengthening thing. But let me tell you, because I think this is important, I was at the last EFY session director training. This was in April because I thought that I would be presenting and teaching this summer, because I really did believe I was going to sort through all of my concerns and that the church would remain true and that we would just press forward and be the stronger for having gone through this experience. Anyway, I overheard, again, people, actually I was in this conversation, and they said, one of the men said that their area director in CES asked, and I can't remember if he said gave a copy, but they wanted them to read Rough Stone Rolling. And another brother in the same conversation, in the same group of people, said that his area director specifically asked them not to read it. So this book is being received differently by different people, but for me it led me to have feelings again of this is disturbing because the history that I've been taught and that I am teaching does not coincide with what really happened. So when Joseph, in the most recent video about Joseph Smith and the restoration that the church has in visitor centers and is now available to the general body of the church, there's the scene where it shows Joseph putting a necklace around Emma's neck. And you see the angst in Emma's eyes, and you feel their pain because they went through a lot as a couple. But nowhere in there, and this is where I find it dishonest, is there the explanation or the inclination or the clear picture that some of that woman's angst was due to what her husband, the marriages and the polygamy and the polyandry that was taking place. And sometimes in their own home.
How candid was Joseph with Emma about the polygamy? He
wasn't. He was dishonest. That's these are my words. And of course everything I'm saying is my opinion. In other words, he hid it from her. And I can't imagine her pain and her anguish. And I guess I began to be, as I discovered and as I pondered, and I don't want to digress too much. One of the questions I most commonly asked is, what was it that you're asking it now? What was it the reasons you left the church? But I feel like it's imperative for me to say that you could bullet list doctrine after historical fact and all these different things, and that wouldn't directly answer your question. Because people want to know, like one member of my former ward said, what was the silver bullet, What was it that did it for you? I don't look at it that way. To me, it is how the information is processed. And when Brooke can maybe talk about this more when she has it, but it was in March when I had the honest feeling that maybe my marriage could be at risk here because of what was going on in our lives and some of the questions that she had. And I started to say, what good is eternal family and heaven and celestial kingdom if I don't have a wife and I'm not with my kids? So emotionally and psychologically, the impetus for looking at things that I had known about, but more closely and differently, was because of those really tender feelings toward my wife and my children. And that's a surface level response.
What did they have to do with all this? How were they in jeopardy?
I felt like that some of the, and again, I'll allow Brooke to talk about this, that some of the issues were strong enough. Well, I'll just talk about it, and then you can add to it. Do you
Okay,
want
but
to
yes,
jump
but
in
before,
here?
because I think that you're doing a disservice by not talking about how
I'm
it
gonna
was
get
maybe
there.
2 years before
Yeah.
you had started
gonna
kind of
mention
opening
that.
up
Okay,
to
okay,
TED and.
No, it's-
So thank you for reminding me. I started.
okay,
Like-
wait. You're going to talk about the God thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we do that, let's just finish the list you're making.
List.
So
Yeah.
polygamy, and it was the
Polyandry.
number of wives, the way that Joseph
polyandry.
did it, that he hid it from Emma,
Yeah.
that he oftentimes pressured, you didn't say this, but I'm going to guess that this is part of it,
Yeah.
that when he would approach these teenage girls, there was a lot of pressure involved.
The family salvation was put on the table. And so then these girls would go and, quote unquote, have a spiritual experience. Well, no, I don't need to put quotes around that. They would have a spiritual experience that affirmed to them, and they would come back maybe the next day or later and say, yeah, this is what we're going to do. Well, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, what kind of pressure is on a young person or on a family where you say your salvation or your family salvation could be dependent on your decision? You decide, do whatever you want, marry me or don't marry me, but your family, I mean, of course they're going to have a spiritual experience. Of
And
course
this is what
they're-
Joseph did, you're saying?
I think that's what he did, and the Book of Abraham. I mean, if I'm going to bullet list the Kinderhook plates, Zelph, the countless the Mountain Meadow massacre, various prophecies, you know, regarding the second coming and then not being fulfilled, and I guess, I got to this point where I realized that I was becoming really good at doing what I would call mental gymnastics around some very serious issues in relation to the veracity of the claims of the church.
What about Book of Mormon?
It began to obviously be a concern, and
Were there issues in the Book of Mormon that you studied and struggled
yeah,
with? Which ones?
I struggled with what I would classify as racism, and I'm aware that there is a line of thought that looks at the curse and the dark skin in a different way, and I don't know if you've read or seen any of Marvin Perkins and what he's doing, and there are different ways to say that that's not so much skin color, but I was disturbed by that.
The fact that God would be cursing people with dark skin because
Yes.
of wickedness.
Yeah, for generations.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if I'm as a sociologist and I started studying sociology in 2000, and then I got my master's in 2003, and then I started teaching in 2007, that's very much a part of this journey for me, because I had an aversion to homophobia and racism and sexism. And I felt like there were these things in the church. And so it was in 2007 or 2008, I was teaching a sociology class, and we were talking about same-gender attraction and gays and lesbians. And I hadn't mentioned that my full-time job was teaching for the church, that this was just my part-time job. It came out that that's what I did. Somebody asked me, and one of my students said, wait a minute, you're Mormon? I said, yeah, I'm very Mormon. You know, I'm actually incredibly LDS, and it's not that my teaching was going against the church, but I just left it out of the classroom, and I taught what was in the text, and we had discussions, and he said, I can't believe that you're saying some of the things that you're saying that seem to be in favor of homosexuality or in favor of you know, same-gender attraction and relationships and rights and all the things we were discussing, and that you're a Mormon. And I remember something, we talked it through, and I can't remember how it ended, but something kind of clicked in me that said, deep down, I have issues with some of the things that I think are part of the doctrinal foundation of the church. It's certainly part of our history.
Can I add to your list too that evolution was a huge one for you?
Yeah.
How?
Because I believe in it. I believe in the evolution of man.
And because, well, because you have that very specific quote
well,
as a
McConkie
seminary teacher
and
that
others,
says,
well, they said that there was no death before the fall. And so, yeah, I was reading recently as I was going through my notes, in fact, I didn't print it, but to Honest Truth Seekers, a letter that Elder McConkie wrote that just addressed 10 points of how you can keep your faith, and one of the things in there was he specifically mentions that evolution can't be possible, and and these are my words, not his, but if you're one of those people on the fringes who believe that it is, bring yourself back to what the church and the brethren have said. But I started about 3 years ago just having doubts about the existence of God. It was so disturbing to me that I, as a seminary teacher, could have these. And you might say, well, what led to that? Educating myself. I started listening to This American Life and Radiolab, and I'm not, by the way, saying that these are evil programs. I know that maybe some people are now going to be like, keep your children from. I think they're fantastic. I think that, and TED, watching talks on TED, and opening my mind and my heart to other people and other ideas, I think was what helped kind of cause me to get to that place. And it was so disturbing, though, that after a couple weeks, Brooke could tell something was wrong. And I remember she asked, what is going on? Almost like something terrible has happened. And I couldn't even say the words. I was so choked up, and it was so difficult. But then I said, I'm having doubts about the existence of God. And Brooke was wonderful. She said, it's okay. People have faith crisis, and it's all right. And my last year of teaching at BYU Education Week, which was 2010, I gave 2 talks. One of them was called Dissolving Doubt, and it focused on how the words of the prophets can help us dissolve our doubts. Well, that was a reflection of where I was. That was me preparing a talk that I needed as much as I felt anybody else needed, because I was having doubts about the existence of God. And naturally, that pushes me to have doubts about the church, because the church is all about God. It's all about, and then to go back to my list, the one true church doctrine and the elitism, that's the word that I would use, began to be very difficult for me, because I couldn't reconcile what I was discovering historically and doctrinally about the church with this claim that we are the one true church, the true and living church. And more than that, I felt like I felt betrayed by the very people that I had trusted the most. I felt like, just tell me the truth. And then tell me what really happened at Carthage. And then I'll decide for myself. Because I'm okay that really, if Joseph had a glass of wine, which he did, and the others there, and somebody smuggled him a revolver, which he fired at the crowd coming up the stairs and killed 2 people and wounded another. And if he made Masonic signs at the window when his life was threatened, I mean, he's about to die. He's scared. I actually really think that I could have been okay with that. But don't present it to me as it happened this way. And make me, not just present it to me, but literally implant it so deep within me that it's hard for me to differentiate between, it really was what we were taught. This is the true church. That I grew up, John, thinking that the worst things that Joseph Smith ever did were, 1, he lost the ability to translate because he got an argument with Emma, and that was taken care of by going out and praying by a tree, if I remember, and then the ability to translate came back. And 2, he lost the 116 pages of manuscript. But even that was presented to me and taught to me, and I taught it as Joseph was trying so hard to be good and trying so hard to be kind and trying so hard to be inclusive, that even though that was a bad thing and that was sad that we lost those, he's still a rock star. Here's this guy that I looked up to so very much. And so I don't know that I finished that point. What the church is and what I taught as a CES man and what was in the curriculum, and that video that shows the angst of Emma and Joseph's tenderness and love, I believe that was there. But they are, in my estimation, the church was being deceitful by leaving out what they left out, by not being completely open. And that's where I think Bushman's book started causing some of us, me, to think and to say, no, wait a minute, this is not what I was told in primary when I was singing songs like Genealogy, I am doing it, my genealogy, and the reason why I am doing it is very clear to me. And yet as a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, I remember thinking, I can't even spell it. I don't know what the hell it is, but it's very clear to me why I'm doing it. And anyway, I started to feel the shelf broke. There was one thing after another when I really opened to the possibility that people are human, and that human beings that get power And that was another thing. Things like Joseph Smith making hhimself a general in Nauvoo with no prior military experience. That was troubling to me, because I always thought that didn't show a measure of humility that I thought that I attributed to him, but instead somebody who really liked power. And maybe I started to think, could it be, this was the big one for me, could it be that he, like so many others who have led organizations and group, perhaps became corrupted by the position that he held, and that this is just another example of an organization that is created by man? And it blew me away when I started thinking, not on a micro level, but a macro level. And I considered the possibility that it is not what it purports to be. And it was, and I don't know if maybe this is not the time to get into this, but it was absolutely devastating. Mm-hmm. I was physically ill. I don't know that I've slept well for months, mm-hmm. Because of the ramifications of what has happened and what I've discovered, and because of how wrapped around that axle I was, because it wasn't just the emotional and spiritual, the psychological, it was the financial, and it was very much part of our lives. So I'm trying to see if I've left anything else out. I maybe if Brooke wants to share her story, then I can supplement it if there are other specifics. But did you have any questions for me?
No, so,
okay.
So, polygamy, polyandry, Book of Abraham, Book of Mormon, race issues, women's issues, same-sex attraction related issues.
Yeah.
Did I already say Mountain Meadows Massacre?
Yeah, the elitism, the
one true church, exclusive authority,
inconsistencies in the doctrinal presentation, the changing in the temple ordinances, the very fact that I think the temple ordinances were created as kind of like an all-boys club for polygamy initially, and that I know that is harsh, and I want to be respectful to my family and my LDS true believing Mormon friends. The temple is a sacred area, and I've found I haven't had a lot of conversations because most people won't even ask me what I think and how I feel now. They just kind of avoid it. But when I do bring up the temple, I'm usually, shushed or cautioned. Mm-hmm. But you ask me an honest question, I'm going to give you an honest answer. I take issue with the changes that have occurred over time in the temple. And
because why? You don't like the changes, or it shouldn't have been changed in the first place?
Joseph Smith says in the teachings of him, the prophet Joseph Smith, that it wouldn't change and that it would stand through the millennium. And I know people can mince words and say, yes, but the heart of it and the ordinances and however you want to wrap your mind around it, I couldn't, because to me it was like with blacks in the priesthood and with polygamy, that it seemed more expedient politically and economically and otherwise to make necessary changes. And that's how I now perceive the changes that occurred in the temple. People were turned off by some of the things that were happening in the temple ceremony in the late 80s, and so was it 1990 or around that time, they made some pretty significant changes into what was done. Those things were still there, John. They were still part of it. And the fact that women were initially excluded, and those are the things that I took issue with, and
it seems like the place where you felt most deeply was in feeling betrayed, deceived, and lied to. Is that right?
Yeah, because honesty is important to me, and I kind of felt duped. I guess I kind of felt like, dang it, I've been presenting this as truth. I've been presenting this matter of factly as the way things happened. And going back to what my father said, which is a good point, why would you not expect the church to put its best foot forward, right? Well, there's a difference between a couple who stands up at EFY and tries to put our best foot forward, although we were very honest about saying, look, we don't have a perfect relationship. There's a difference between that and a church that says, and a book that says the most correct book of any on earth, the only true and living church. So this absolute claim, and I was looking at that quote from President Hinckley in 2003, where he and there are multiple quotes like this, but he says that either Joseph told the truth and the church is true, or it's a fraud. And you have to decide, and I quote now, that part I was paraphrasing, but now I quote, there is no middle ground. Joseph Fielding Smith in Doctrines of Salvation said the same thing. Well, where does that leave somebody who discovers these things, sees the discrepancy between what I've been told, what I've been taught, what I've been teaching, and what really happened. I couldn't, and part of this was being in CES, but there was no easing off. For me, I didn't feel like I could just go, well, let me just kind of take this slow and see what's there is no middle ground. I haven't been told the truth. And let me use another analogy. I thought when I went through all these layers that I would find a diamond. That all this history and all these doctrines and all these things, at the heart of this, I thought that I would discover a diamond and pure goodness that had led to what I now see as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And this is going to maybe sound a little bit harsh, but instead, my analogy is that it was dung. In that, is the church beautiful today? In many ways. Has it sprouted and blossomed and become something that benefits people? Absolutely. Are the truth claims that the church made and the historical way that we've presented ourselves, and as a missionary that I would go out and tell people about, and then as I would train missionaries, is that accurate? I do not believe that it is. And so good things can come out of a lot of different things in life. And the reason I bring that up is we met with the stake president in September when we were considering coming back to the church very recently. And he said that Jesus said, by their fruits ye shall know them, not their roots. And I thought that's a clever way, actually a really good thought. You know, I remember thinking, almost like, don't worry about the history, don't worry about the mess and the things that we don't know about and that we can't explain. Look at what it is now. The problem with that, though, is that if the doctrinal, and this journey for me was about doctrine and accuracy, and that is, and Brooke, and I'm going to be quiet so she can talk here because I think I'm talking too much.
No, it's good.
Brooke was a little bit different, I think, in the way that she cared about those things as well. But as a teacher, as a CES man, I felt like it was my duty to be doctrinally clear and pure. And I am not professing to be an expert on the things that I've studied. And I've never made the claim that I am like a great historian. Many people know more than I do. My colleagues are much more well-versed. But I am saying this. The things that I encountered, the evidence that I read and weighed, that, to paraphrase, what's the name of that beautiful woman that on that video that we watched? Michelle. On one of those I Am an Ex-Mormon videos. Like a judge that makes a ruling and then new evidence is presented. I've weighed that, I've considered it, and I'm overturning my ruling. And so some people have said, how can you deny your past experiences? How can you deny the testimony you had of the Book of Mormon and the things that you've said? I don't. Meaning, in that moment, when I said those things, I fully believed them. It was special to me. I had spiritual experiences. But now new evidence has come in, and I can't, in good conscience, give my life personally or professionally to something that I think is not being truthful about what it is and where it came from. And so there are many good people and much good in the church. But if the doctrinal claims about salvation, about priesthood, and about ordinances are not what I've always been told that they are, then I don't see really how I can stay. That's me. I don't know if, I'll let you talk now.
Beautiful, okay. So Brooke, parallel to this, I'm assuming you were having your own process.
Yeah, so
Talk about
let's see. Well, if we go back to I think BYU was the first time when I was in institute classes. You know, I was always in church on Sundays, but BYU was, I remember a couple of times in institute classes where a little negative history would be dropped. And I remember a quote being mentioned where the professor, institute teacher said, he offered a quote that essentially indicated that the millennium or the second coming was within a matter of years for the saints. And he said, don't you think that saints have always believed this? And I remember having this dropping feeling, like the whole world was coming out from under me. But of course I'm sitting at BYU, I'm about to be married. So I'm waiting for him to fix everything, put it back together so I can keep going. And so that happened several times with, just little nuggets of history or whatever, where I would have that feeling, and then I'd be like, okay, what do we need to do? So I would fix, each issue one at a time, and that was that. And of course I knew the church to be good and wonderful, and so that wasn't a problem. And then throughout our marriage, there have been a couple of times, like I remember once a lady was brought by the missionaries to church, and I liked her right away. There was something very real about her. And I went home, and that night John came home and said she's going to get baptized. And it was the first time she'd ever been to church. And I felt really concerned about that, because I didn't feel like she had had enough time to fully understand what being a member of the church was, and to understand if that was good for her. And, John was like, well, the missionaries know what they're doing. And so she got baptized, and, so little things like that. I didn't like the feeling of someone being coerced. Then again, and I never liked this demand that I needed to always be a missionary, but I was always aware of it. Once John gave me a pass-along card when I was going into the dollar store and told me to pass it along to someone. And so
right before she went in, I just dropped it on her. I'm like,
yeah, I always struggled with that aspect in the back of my head, because I always felt like it should be a choice for people. And so maybe in that way, the One True Church was true for me, but I was keenly aware of the demands it would place on other people's time, and that always kind of sat wrong with me. Then, so all of this is just kind of sitting there and here and everywhere. And then last year, I have a website and had several companies call me to go on trips with this blog. And so I would get together with other bloggers, and a few of them were LDS, because, there's Mormons all over the blogosphere, but quite a few of them were not. And so there was for me, what was probably really the moment where a little crack happened was we had gone at the end of the day to a wine bar, and one of the bloggers, there was only one male blogger, and he had sat next to me, and we were talking, and so everybody is progressively getting more, just settling into the night, and the wine is flowing, and we're approaching midnight, so it's dark outside, and I'm not with my family. And then this guy sitting next to me drops that he's gay. And we had really kind of connected. And so, immediately I thought, oh, wait, I have to think about this, because all of a sudden something happened, and I now understand it to be the Danish word hygge, which is there was this human connection that in 35 years of my life, I had never felt. It was like, for those hours, we were just living for each other. And no one was in a hurry to get to a meeting. No, there was something very real about sitting at that table, and it was midnight, and that feeling was what I would consider a deeper feeling of the Spirit than I had ever felt before. And so it really kind of set me back a little bit, and I thought, I have to make sense of this. We're approaching midnight, I'm sitting next to a gay guy, like, by all means, this is not making sense in my Mormon world. And I wanted that feeling again. I wanted to feel connected to people again in that really honest way, because that was a very new sensation, and it was beautiful. And so, I went home and sat it there and got back into everything. But for a period of time, even before this, I had been craving what I would call true worship. For whatever reason, I remember saying once to John, shortly after our kids were born, I want to light a candle and kneel in a dark church. And I don't know, was I Catholic in another life? I have no idea where that came from, but I felt a very deep longing for a level of worship that I was not getting in church meetings. And I felt like church meetings were nice, and they were familiar, and we were busy, and we were going from here to here, and da-da-da. So that kind of started to build even more so now that I had started to have these connections. And then I started to look at other people, and their lives became very valid to me. I could see that they weren't just 60% wattage happy. They were really happy people. And they were really making choices for their lives based on logic and information, not just coercion. And so all of these things started to really weigh heavily on my mind. And then the gay guy and I became good friends, and we started to connect with him well, first of all, he and I have a lot of a similar background. You know, he was very involved in a church, and so I came to know him as a very moral, kind person. And then we got to know him and his partner, and I was really holding on to that relationship because I was afraid that he would find that I was maybe not Christian. And so I think I started to overcompensate. I really wanted him and this friend Dave to feel loved and to know that, you know, we welcomed them into our lives. And at the same time, you know, I started to really ask the question to myself, how is it that God will let some of these people in my life that are members of the church who are miserable, sitting at the dinner table together for 20 or 30 years, who don't even talk to each other, be together for eternity, and yet these two men who genuinely love each other, who have genuinely chosen to be together, they have to be separated for all of eternity. And so that question didn't make sense to me, because I think if we can find a way to make that work in our very mortal world, why can God not find a way to make that work in an immortal world? So all of these things are about, and in March, that was kind of the point where church started feeling very rote to me, and sitting through classes, I didn't agree with a lot of what was going on. And so I felt very clearly that I was no longer capable of being this person that I knew that he had married. I wanted my life to be bigger than this constant cycle of church and meetings and church and meetings. And I wanted to travel. I wanted to invite people into our lives on this new level that I had discovered. I wanted to go out with gay friends. I wanted our life to be so much bigger than this very tiny cycle that we had created. And so I said that as much to John, and I wanted to relieve him of the duty of being married to someone so big as me. I felt like maybe I was being too romantic, and that made sense for me, but it wouldn't be fair to bring him along on that journey because I understood the guidelines. And so I said as much to him on a Sunday night in March. I said, I am not good for you. I know that for you to be the kind of priest and leader that you need to be within the bounds that we have agreed on, you can't be married to me anymore. And so...
Well, and there may have been some guilt because there's an undercurrent and sometimes very clear statements from the brethren about women working. And so here was Brooke working, and there's some irony there, I think.
And loving it.
Because why is she working? Because we're trying to make ends meet, even though we're CES, and so we're frowned upon to have your wife working. But many of the CES couples I know, they have to be creative, and the women do work outside the home. But not only, she wasn't just working, she was thoroughly enjoying it. And
I was good at it.
And
it made me a better mom, too. And so that was not making any sense either, because that was supposed to make me a worse mom, right? So then that started a period of...
Okay, so wait. The alarm bell that's going off in my mind is that you are wanting to commit adultery. That because wait a minute, it doesn't make sense to me. How could you say that you're not worthy to be his companion? Like, what is it about even being a blogger and having a gay friend that would make you feel like you weren't worthy to be a CES spouse?
Going to be his, sure.
And so I'm going to say you must have wanted to cheat on him, or were you into porn? Like, what were you?
Nothing so exotic. Okay, do you want to connect them?
Well, let me say, because I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think people watching might say, wait a minute, there's a disconnect. How did it get to suddenly your marriage is falling apart? I had some challenges with the relationship she had with Russell, and it wasn't that he was gay, because I was very content and accepting of this, because I've long believed that people that are gay don't choose to be gay. They are. And so, that's been a struggle. And so, but she was emailing and texting and stuff, and so I felt like there was definitely not going to be an affair. But here I was trying to weigh what the church had taught me about being the patriarch and committed relationships and wife. I'm trying to articulate this, and it's not coming out very well.
Well, it's the stereotypical roles.
But right?
You're breaking the mold.
Exactly.
Yeah, and exactly.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, when I started to find out that my friends actually had not just not just other girlfriends, but like guys that they'd go hang out with.
Yeah.
It wasn't that I wanted to go hang out with guys, but it was kind of like, I sensed that John was very uncomfortable with this because,
I felt some jealousy.
I can pinpoint
I really
it.
did.
And it's because we had been raised within the CES culture saying John never should drive, even if his secretary, who is significantly older than him, her car breaks down.
Could never be alone with a female.
He should never be. And so I think that we started to build these very clear walls between us and other human beings, and this was what mattered, and everybody else could come for dinner, but that was it. And
what
so,
about Cliff? I mean, just a contrast.
Oh yeah, that's an interesting one. So we had some friends years before that were our good friends. They had moved out of town and then moved back into town, and he was a stay-at-home dad and she was working. And so when they moved back into town, they really had moved in to be close to us because we've always been like family to them. And so he said, when does John go to work? Because I'm going to come by with the boys. And I was like, no, you can't come over. And I was so uncomfortable that anyone would think that in any way, and he was so devastated. He was so devastated because he said
that was
not LDS.
No, not LDS.
And that was very hard for him to wrap his mind around why he couldn't come
he
with
was
his
saying,
son and hang out with my wife, who also had a young baby.
He was like, I see you as people that are our friends. I have no desire to make a move. It's just convenience-wise, we're both home. Why don't we let the kids get together and socialize? And there was no room in our relationship for that.
The reason I brought that up is unitedly at that time we agreed inappropriate. That would never happen because that's not what we would do. So fast forward, and now there's this relationship, and I'm having all these feelings of, even though, and I'm kind of hesitant because I wonder if this is going to be watched by these dear friends of ours, and I don't want to make them in any way feel bad, but I need to be honest about the kind of the difficulty I had with that. This was brand new. We're having new thoughts and new experiences, and I feel like my wife is drifting from me, and she was. I mean, by her own admission, she's feeling like this life that we have is not working, and I need wings to fly, and I don't need you looking over my shoulder to see if I'm texting Russell or being concerned about this, that, or the other thing.
Well, and I think that you felt like you had all the right, like, I feel like in our relationship, John has always felt like he has the right to manage and control all the little things. So if he doesn't, and
I've tried to be nice.
I know, and I'm not trying to be hard on you, but I want to be honest.
Right. No, that's okay.
And this is why it came to a head, because I suddenly realized not only did I have a voice, but I had equal capability, and I had equal ability to touch other people's life, touch other people's life, and reach out. And I felt John pulling the priesthood on me. I'm not comfortable with that. But boom, end of the conversation. And that is always how it's been.
I didn't try to do it.
Not
like
that you were trying. I know you had complete.
No. You don't have to defend yourself.
Right.
Because we
And
know
so,
whatever you would have done would have been nice. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, it was. And of course, I bought into that because I was I was supposed to allow him to make the final decision, right? We're equal partners, but if there's ever a question, he gets the final decision.
He's presiding in a relationship of equals.
Right. And so I think that for me, it wasn't that I didn't even have guys I wanted to go hang out with, but I just suddenly realized that there was like a more open way for me to conduct my life, that friends could actually feel like family.
So there was no affair.
And I wanted that, but I felt like John was not comfortable with that, and I didn't want to ask him to push beyond where he was comfortable.
I sensed a drifting emotionally
right.
in a certain direction that felt away from me.
And I wouldn't say it was a drifting. I would say it was a full-blown run.
Wow.
I was like,
in retrospect,
I see this awesome life.
Okay, so if I could just summarize, there's this box that, you're supposed to be supporting him. He's the one that does the speaking, but you can accompany him, but all in the context of what he has. Your job is to be a mommy and to be the best mommy that you can and to support. His job. Yeah. If you have to work, which the church kind of puts you in a position where you have to, at best you should feel guilty about it. Right?
Yes.
Right?
Right.
Yeah. And then this whole idea of being around non-member, you're supposed to socialize mostly with members because that's what we do. The ward and member responsibilities are going to keep you busy.
They all have the 100 wattage anyway, so it's more worth my time.
Right, and
Right.
because these are the light.
Because
These
the
are
other
the chosen
people are
people.
not
Right.
Can you hang
truly
around the
happy.
chosen?
They don't
Right.
know it,
Everybody
but-
else,
yeah.
Satan might get into the conversation and confuse things.
Right.
Plus, they might even be drinking alcohol. Can you imagine?
Right,
I
so
mean,
there's-
heaven
so-
forbid. There's all these.
So no
things,
alcohol,
yeah.
no late nights, and of course no working in a way to where you're the voice,
Right.
where you have something to
Right.
share, where your light on its own independently
Yeah.
could influence and inspire people.
Right.
And then and then this whole idea of being around people till midnight and gay people, and it's just these boxes. You're in these boxes.
Yes, and we absolutely abided the walls of the box until
And then
I
what happened?
found out that outside the wall of the box was Technicolor. And all of a sudden I was like, I can no longer be happy being the voiceless, quiet, submissive. Although I think there's space for humility and submission, absolutely. And in a marriage, there has to be this give or take. But I think that I realized what my true potential was. And I feel like if God is who I believe he is, he wants me to see my true potential. And while part of that potential for me is fulfilling the role of mother, because it's absolutely, I love being a mother. I want to eat my children. I love my children. I love that part. But to also realize that that there is so much capability beyond this very tiny border of a country that I had been living in. In fact,
I want to say something if I can
Oh, yeah, go
about that,
ahead.
because
Don't forget what you're about to
yes,
say.
I
but
won't
this-
forget it.
Put a pin in it.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but one of the things that's been said to me, and I don't think anybody's really confronted Brooke directly about this, but I know that my family has felt that she is the reason that maybe I've left. In other words, that there has been some blaming, whether backhanded or directly, of saying that because Brooke was going through this and finding herself, which, by the way, while it may have been difficult at the time, and having an argument with your spouse is never fun, especially if it leads you to the point where you're like, maybe this isn't going to work out. In retrospect, when I look back on what she's been through and how she's grown, it's beautiful. It's magnificent. And I want to acknowledge that, and I also want to say that my decision to leave the church was mine. And I own that. And I don't, this psychological break, or this thing that happened in March that caused me perhaps to dive into things in a deeper level like never before, that was real, that happened. But we didn't make this, I made this decision on my own. And I want to say that I just feel like I need to. There's a song by John Mayer that about 3x5s, and no more 3x5s. That what Brooke is saying about the myopic view that we had of the world and the people in it and their happiness and what makes people happy and all these different notions, it just got blown up. And people have been so sorry for us. Like, there have been so many people that have talked about how sad it must be and how tragic and how awful, and it's like a death in the family. And there has been sorrow, and maybe we'll talk about that because it's been very real and it's been very painful and difficult. But what Brooke is saying here now, I think, is very important, and it's beautiful. It's amazing to get to a place, and I think we're still on this journey, but these same two people that Brooke's mentioning, her gay friend and her partner, they're now good friends of ours that we have a good relationship with. And this went from me being, I'm concerned about this relationship and feeling jealousy, to a couple months ago buying a ticket for Brooke so she could go out and be with him. Now that didn't work out, but it'll happen in the
boyfriend.
future. But what I'm saying is, and I hope this doesn't sound arrogant or boastful, but there's a kind of growth that can come outside of the church that couldn't have come for us within. I think that's what I'm trying to say. So I'm sorry to cut you
That's
off.
awesome. Thank you.
No, yeah, I like how you said that. And, and I also have to say that experience in March, part of my frustration with John was not just this behind the scenes feeling of this priesthood authority and being pinned down, which I know didn't just come from you, so I don't want to just pretend like it is. But because I had suddenly felt fulfilled, like this fulfillment and growth come from my own career, I desired it so much for John.
She did.
I sound like Eve. I desire for you to partake.
She began to be not love CES as much. Is that
well,
fair to
and
say?
I felt like John had hit a point for several years in CES where he was showing up to work and he was doing it and he loved it because he was supposed to love it and it was familiar and it was nice. But I didn't see him actually utilizing talents or like waking up every morning. You know, I think it's how you feel about Mormon stories. You love it. And I wanted him to do something that was making him better every day. And I felt like because he was stuck in this curriculum that was the same every 4 years, and maybe every now and then you would see the added addition of you get to teach the kids that Joseph translated with a peepstone. It was the same.
It's actually not in the seminary curriculum. But
Yes.
we can talk about that maybe
Anyway,
later.
you know, so like I just felt like he was caught in the cycle of same. And I totally understand that for some people, same is wonderful. It is familiar, it is comfortable, that is what we aspire to. But I wanted him to feel lit up with endless potential. So I wanted him to feel lit up with the same kind of eternal potential that I felt. And I felt like he was very limited. And so I will say that part of that in March also was me feeling frustrated with John kind of standing still and beating that same drum. Like we'd already arrived. And I had felt that again, in this longing for a truly worshipful experience that I didn't feel like I was getting. I started for years, I had been waking up in the morning feeling like I was suffocated. I felt like, oh my gosh, here we go again. And if this is what life is just this same, this is it, we've arrived and we're 35 and it's going to be the same. There was no change in sight. And that was terrifying for me.
So it sounds a lot like the movie Pleasantville. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yes, it was very.
Oh my
where
goodness.
all of a sudden it's black and white,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden
There's
it's
a little
Technicolor.
color.
That's
Yeah.
right. I
It's
remember
almost like
watching
Lehi's
that.
dream, but you get this joy
Yeah.
of being outside the box.
Yes.
That you want to pursue, but you feel guilty for pursuing it.
Right.
And then you want to share it with him.
Yeah.
Not only
Well,
guilty,
and
but
not just joy, but
fear, I
like
think.
love. Like all of a sudden, God could be everywhere, and I didn't have to limit the love that I felt for people based on their labels or who they were or what religion. All of a sudden, I could be open,
Even with your own mother, I
wide
remember-
open to this whole world,
with that conversation that you had with your mom
even to my own mother.
about how it changed the view of the day that we were married in the temple, and going from, that was pretty tender.
I think for the first time in my whole life, I finally asked my mom so that I could understand her rather than to
help her.
And that was it. And so again, when I get to this place where I suddenly feel more Christ-like than I've ever been, I don't understand how I can go back. And I wouldn't have gotten here if I hadn't blown my initial paradigm wide open. And so for me, that's where it started. I started saying that paradigm worked beautifully for a while, but it started to limit me. And that was when,
I just want to add one thing.
yeah,
The stereotypes are that people who leave the church, they're weak,
yes,
Right.
they're lacking faith,
Right.
they're not doing the basics, they're not doing
Sinful.
the fundamentals. They're doing pornography,
right,
they're dishonest in some way, they're probably even adulterers.
yeah,
And what I'm hearing you saying is this came from a place of integrity,
yeah.
this came from a place of love and a place of joy.
And it came from a belief that God was bigger. You know,
Right.
like I remember saying, I think God is bigger than I've been giving him credit for. So to suddenly realize that the 13th article of faith, I really could believe in all things. You know, before that had been very limited because I believed I was part of the one true church. And I think it was Bob McHugh who said, when I am taught that all things Mormon are better than not Mormon, how can it be any other way but that I would seek to fill my time and my space with all of these safe things, because Satan could be anywhere else. And so, yes, for us, and you know, for me, that is the greatest sadness, is that so many people who have responded and continue to respond in pushing us out of their lives don't understand that this was a choice about love. You know, it wasn't that we wanted to push them away, it was that we wanted to open up wide enough to allow more people in. And so to me, it's sad that it has to be that we would lose other people by wanting to love more fully. But, you know, the system of the church is the way it is right now. And to me, that's devastating that we have people, you know, like, I don't think that a single one of our really close friends has ever asked what I believe in about God or heaven, you know. And I remember saying to John's sister, I still believe in God. I just believe that there's going to be a lot more people in heaven with us. And it was just like, write it off, you know. And so for me, there's great sorrow in that, because you're exactly right. And we know, we've had several people telling us there's all sorts of great rumors going around.
Oh, yeah.
But
all of the things you listed.
not one of those
have
things.
in one way or another been attributed to us.
Yeah, but not
Backhanded
one of
rumors
those
you hear
things.
that I had an affair, that Brooke had an affair. I mean, one of my own family members, after the news came out, just point blank, was texting me and just said, "What is it? Illicit drugs? Are you stepping out on Brooke? What is it?" And you know, we can honestly say none of the above.
No, yeah, it was from integrity.
Fact, and I think this is apparent to anybody who wants to try to put themselves in our shoes and think this through. It was easier for the Mclays to stay.
Right.
Our lives would have been, in many ways, significantly easier had we continued to believe what I would now call the myth, if we had just bought back into it. So, and I don't want to, again, put myself on a pedestal,
or found a way to change it so that we made it fit.
Although I couldn't, because of my job and who I was, there really was no middle ground.
Right, we wanted to be we've always lived our faith so openly, and we wanted that to continue. You know, I didn't, and that was, again, for me, I thought, well, the church teaches X, Y, and Z, and my beliefs don't align with X, Y, and Z anymore, so it's not fair for me to keep showing up and letting other people think that I believe those things when I don't. You know, I believe that gay people are fantastic and should have a right to deep, meaningful relationships in this life. Yeah. I believe in a heaven that is not so limited by what you drink. You know, and so for me, I certainly could have stayed in nuanced things, but it started to become a question of, was it worth my time to keep going back into the box when there were so many other things to supplement my life with? So I also have to say, throughout the process, of course, then obviously doctrinal issues had very little to do with my initial issues. But when I made the connection that we had to pay money to receive a temple recommend, that really did not sit well with me. When, you know, in fact, I had a friend who's an Episcopalian who said, "And that never bothered you?" And I was like, no, I never even thought twice.
You frame it as it has nothing to do with money, it's about faith.
Yeah, I just wanted to be the best that I could with the paradigm that I was given, and I didn't ask questions. For me, I think that learning that there was more than one version of the first vision was extremely difficult doctrinally. I once read the story of Wikipedia, or on Wikipedia, just the broad history of the early Mormon movement. And I think that was the first time that I actually laughed out loud and said, I can't believe what I believed, because it was very obvious to me that there were people within that community who also struggled. So just starting to kind of connect the dots and look at my belief in the church on a very macro level instead of a very micro level helped me realize that there were some things that I could certainly make them fit when I looked at them one by one. But when I wanted to look at it on this worldview and understand a God who has a worldview, it was going to change things. So.
Come, ye saints, no toil nor labor fear, but with joy wend your way. Though hard to you this journey may appear, grace shall be as your day. 'Tis better far for us to strive our useless cares from us to drive to the sand, Joe. Your hearts will swell